Hi everyone, my name is Sally Fowler. I'm the owner and trainer for Disabled Advantage. Thank you for joining me on my Patreon tier Service Dog Questions Answered. Today's question is, what are 6 things owner training teams should be training but aren't? And what I'm going to be talking about today may also be things that if you got a dog from a program, they may be skills that were not covered with you explicitly, or they might be things that you know that your dog is struggling with a little bit, which might be a sign that it's something the program didn't necessarily include in their training course either. These are 6 things that seem to surprise people when I give them advice on doing this particular skill to help with a problem that they're having, or that I show a video of my dog doing it. I get a lot of questions as to why we're doing it. And so that's how I formulated this list. This list is not going to go into great detail on how to train these 6 things, but I will give a brief overview of each thing, and all 6 things are included in training a service dog with me, not necessarily in my service dog course, but they're actually scattered throughout all of the courses that someone takes with me. But they're also possible to sign up for as individual skills with me if you need to add them to your training repertoire with your dog. So let's get started. What are 6 things teams should be training but aren't? The first thing is chair and table etiquette. And this one seems like a no-brainer and it seems really simple, but I've seen a lot of photos and a lot of videos on social media that suggest that teams aren't putting a lot of thought into placing their dog beside a table or beside a chair, and the dog ends up in the way of general foot traffic. And maybe it's being done on purpose. If you're working with a really big dog, it is definitely very difficult to position the dog in a tight formation near a table or a chair. If you're doing it to create space for yourself in way of blocking, that is certainly a way to do it, but you're more likely to be putting your dog at risk of getting tripped over and harming other patrons than necessarily blocking for your space. And it's also possible for a dog to create space around you and still not be in the way. So when I work with clients, I teach as many different chair and table scenarios as I've found in my own public access experiences. One of the things that I teach to do is, first of all, the different positions. But the second thing I teach to do is I teach teams how to go into a restaurant or a cafe and immediately survey the entire area and pick out the tables that they know would be the best to position their service dog. And that's the table they ask for, or that's the table they gravitate towards, but also to teach them the next best thing and the last best thing, and also to know when to look around a place and go, yeah, we can't be here, and leave. Because there are a lot of restaurants and cafes that they simply don't take into account the consideration for maneuvering with a large service dog. And that's unfortunate, but that is how it is. There's also times where you'll go in someplace and it'll just be packed with people. And so the ideal places for you to sit with your dog are already taken, and you end up having to leave because of that. Occasionally, you encounter really awesome people. There was one day in Panera. I love Panera for their food, but man, is it hard to position a dog in there. Austin's 85 pounds and sturdy. He's very bulky, 85 pounds. He's not a lean, lithe 85 pounds. And so he takes up a lot of space. And I have to take his space into consideration. I have to take my disability into consideration. Sitting at a table with really tall chairs makes it harder to position Austin safely out of the way. It also makes it harder for me to hold the leash. I like to keep a hold of the leash the entire time. just for extra safety and security. And then I also can't have my legs dangling. So tall chairs are out. Tiny booths are out because there's not really a great place to put Austin. So I usually gravitate for the comfy chairs because they accommodate my disability. They're chairs that are more comfortable. I don't want to say they're great, but they're chairs that are less likely to cause an intense flare up. Let's phrase it that way. And they usually have more floor space, or they have space behind them so I can put Austin behind the chair and the wall. And we came into Panera one day and we looked around and we stood there. And I guess we stood there for too long. But we stood there looking around, and I finally turned to my husband and I just said, there's nowhere to sit. We're going to have to find some other place to leave. And I don't know if this guy heard us or if he just saw us standing there and put two and two together. But he actually followed us out of the restaurant, and he had been sitting in the comfy chair spot, and he offered to give up his spot and to move to a smaller table that we had dismissed, because he knew that we needed the space for my service dog. And that was really, really awesome. But that is not a common occurrence. So the positions that I teach teams how to navigate and how to figure out what's best for them and their team and what tasks they might need, like if you need bracing every time you stand up, how to navigate from the position that the dog is in into being in the right spot for bracing, and also how to pick the best seating for different types of restaurants and cafes and scenarios. I teach several different positions. I teach how to teach the dog to lay beside your chair and to roll, to either stay in Sphinx where their body's in a straight line, or to always roll so that their spine is up against the chair and their feet are out in the pathway, not that their whole body's out in the pathway. So if a dog starts to roll the wrong way, I actually do encourage people to give them a correction and convince the dog to roll their spine towards the chair. I also teach the dog to go under the table, under a person's legs, so under the person's legs, but in front of the chair itself, under the chair, between the chair and a wall. So sometimes that's going around behind the chair into that space, and other times it's lining up next to the handler a little bit in front and then backing into a space and laying down, and also laying behind the chair so that the dog is between a wall and the chair, but they're behind the chair instead of being beside the chair. And so those are the main ones that I teach all my teams. And what a team uses is going to depend on a lot of different factors. It depends on the place. It depends on the time of day. It depends on the size of the dog. It depends on the willingness of the dog. It depends on if they use a wheelchair themselves or not. If their legs are long enough to accommodate their giant dog being underneath them, and things like that. And it also just depends on your dog themselves. Austin is a lot more confident about things moving around him and chaos than Robbie was. And so I know that if I have to, I can ask Austin to lay beside my chair in a busy cafe or a busy restaurant, and he'll stay close to my chair and out of the way, and he's not going to be bothered by people constantly walking past. Whereas I know Robbie would have done it, and he would have been better at tucking up, but he would have been a little bit more on edge about it, and he did better. I could actually get Robbie to take naps in restaurants if we were at a booth. Whereas if we had him lay beside a chair, he stayed in alert mode longer, and sometimes wouldn't nap at all if he was beside my chair out in the middle of everything. Whereas Austin is quickly learning to just, well, we're here, I'll take a nap. And it doesn't matter if he's under a booth or beside my chair. Different dogs. I teach all of these because personally, I like putting the dog under the table. It's the safest, it's the most out of the way, it's the easiest. But when you have a bigger dog, their height interferes with that, especially if they're wearing a pack or a harness with a handle on it. They quickly, when Austin's standing under a standard restaurant table, I can barely put my hand in between the top of his back and the underside of the table. So that's how tall he is. The other problem is that if you're out to eat with a lot of people, it's a lot of people's feet and your giant dog sharing the foot space under this table. And so a lot of times you end up sitting really weird with your feet splayed out and your feet twisted, or you just accept that you're going to have a 90-pound dog laying on your feet and you're not going to be able to feel your feet at the end of the evening. And this was more of a problem. It's a problem with Austin because he's so big, but honestly, it was more of a problem with Robbie because he wasn't as big, but he was very bony. And so no matter how he laid on you, you could feel his bones pressing into you, and it was kind of uncomfortable. So the reason I spend time and I devote lesson time to teaching the chair and table etiquette is because I want teams to give a professional outward appearance. And to me, in my opinion, that's a team that doesn't go out of their way to be a nuisance to other patrons. And so that's having your dog in a tight formation close to you and being able to navigate different scenarios and position your dog in a way that's still convenient for you and works with your disability, but also keeps your dog out of the way. And it's for the safety of your dog, because if your dog is out in the middle of where normal foot traffic is, they're more likely to have their paws or their tails stepped on, or to outrightly have people stepping over their entire body, accidentally kicking them, dropping things on them. It's just not safe for them. A lot of restaurants, like I said, are not laid out with service dogs in mind. So if your service dog goes into a restaurant and sprawls out across the floor, taking up as much space as possible, one, that's not very professional, and two, it is a direct inconvenience to the rest of the patrons, and it could very well be a reason for staff to ask you to get your dog better under control or to ask you to leave. And that's not explicitly said in the ADA, but I would understand if somebody asked you to leave because you thought it was okay for your dog to come in, take up as much floor space as they wanted, or even start land sharking in the middle of the restaurant. When you, in my experience also, when you restrict your dog's, the type of down that your dog is doing, and you restrict their positioning in public, they're more likely to stay in that work mode and stay focused on their job and not slip into wiggly, goofy, land sharking dog on the floor. If no one has taught you how to maneuver your dog with different chair and table setups, and nobody's taught you how to pick what table is best for your team based on your disability and your size of dog and what gear you use, that is an individual course that I offer. I offer to teach people one-off skills for their service dog team to learn, things like chair and table etiquette, off-leash heel, precision heeling, where the dog can be really precise in their movements with you, and other skills like that that maybe aren't included in traditional training programs or weren't included because you were working with a pet dog trainer who didn't fully understand what all a service dog needed to know and be aware of for handling. I also cover how to handle your leash when you are sitting at a chair or a table, and it also depends on what chair and table you're sitting at. If you're sitting at your desk in your office space, dropping the leash is one thing. If you're in a busy restaurant, sitting on your leash gives you a better control over your dog, because also it's going to tell you if your dog is doing things they shouldn't do, like sniff the floor or eating scraps off the floor. because you'll feel the leash moving, and that cues you into what's going on with your dog before you visibly see what's going on with your dog. And that's something that's very affordable. It depends on how many sessions you need. But it's a one-off course that you can sign up for if it's something that you feel is lacking in your team's repertoire. The second thing I think a lot of teams should be training, or at least should be doing more of, is what I call the simple exist exercise. And this is an exercise where you take your dog to quiet places, you take your dog to medium busy places, you take your dog to very busy places, and then you just ask them to be there. And that's it. Ideally, this is a skill that needs to be started from day one of you working with your dog, whether you're training a puppy or you're training an older dog from a shelter or a rescue. Your simple exist exercise is perfect for socialization because it gives the dog a chance to get used to their environment and see sights and sounds and smell things and be exposed to different types of events and people and places and stimuli, but the expectation level is pretty low. You're not asking them to also focus on you. You're not asking them to also remember command words and do it correctly. All you're asking them to do is, hey, we're going to sit here. You can sit, you can lay down, but you need to be calm. You can't be barking at stuff. You can't lunge at stuff. We're going to give you corrections for any nonsense. You're just going to exist here. And this is the exercise. And it's so easy to fit in because you want some coffee? Great. Go to the coffee shop, sit outside, sit on the leash, take your book. Simple exist exercise. Bam, right there. You have homework to do on your campus. Pick a spot on campus where you want to do your homework. Have the dog lay down beside you. Simple exist exercise. When we were first training Austin in Walmart, I started out sitting on a bench outside Walmart, and we would stay there the entire time my husband was doing the grocery shopping. So he got the exposure of parking lots, traffic, people talking to him, people passing by, shopping carts, the doors opening and closing, sporadically hearing outdoor music and then indoor sounds every time the doors opened, and just existing, being immersed in that environment, but without any expectations placed on him other than don't be an idiot. Meaning don't bark, don't growl, don't, bounce around, be chill. And we did that for a few months, and then we moved to sitting inside Walmart on one of those benches near the front. So he saw the checkout line and shopping carts and people talking to him and people almost stepping on his feet because they passed too close to my personal space bubble. And things like that. And then he started learning how to walk through the store with me. Still not many expectations. The expectation was, sit down, heel, moving with a shopping cart. But doing all of those simple existence exercises outside of Walmart, inside of Walmart, and then starting to do active work in Walmart made the transition of socialization for him so much easier. We did this with Austin right from the beginning. We did this with Robbie right from the beginning. And the one thing they've both been really good at is, okay, we're here now. I'm going to settle down. Now, Robbie was better at it than Austin. Robbie actually learned to sleep anywhere through anything. Austin seems to really like chaos. And so he, for a long time, wanted to stay awake because he wanted to watch everything and he didn't want to miss anything. And so it's been harder for him to learn to take naps in public, but we are getting there finally at 3 years old. But the simple exist exercise, it's a great break for you. It's excellent training for your dog. It feels like you're doing nothing, but you're doing so much. You're letting your dog learn about the world around them and absorb it without putting additional pressure on them, which is huge. And you're teaching them that sometimes being a service dog is going to be boring and you got to be okay with it. It's also a chance to practice your chair and table skills, maneuvering into position and maneuvering out of position by that table or that chair. And it gives you a way to fit in more of your normal life stuff with training your dog. So it's a really wonderful skill that more teams could benefit from. It'll help your dog learn to be bored. It'll help your dog learn to take naps in public. It'll help your dog work on their positioning. And it'll help your dog learn to stay in work mode even when you're not necessarily doing a bunch of tasks, which is really important. Oh, and one thing that's really important with Simple Exist is that if your dog does start to get a little stressed out about something, you need to stay for longer. Let them work through it the same way you would letting them work through something in their kennel or in place. If you leave someplace while your dog is having a stress ball moment, they could potentially develop an aversion to that place and possibly noises that exist there, and then you have a much bigger problem on your hands. Now, if your dog gets startled by something, you might decide to get up and walk around and work a little bit and then go back into Simple Exist. If they get really stressed out to the point of making a bunch of noise and being a disruption, you might need to move outside, but keep doing the Simple Exist exercise. Just be outside where you're less of a disturbance, and then try inside on a different day. Okay, so the next thing that teams need to be doing, but quite possibly are not, is we tend to avoid what we don't like or that's difficult for our disability, but our service dog needs to learn how to function and how to work and how to operate in places that we especially struggle in, so that they know how to help us in places that we struggle in. I'll give you an example because that sentence is kind of complicated. I'm not a big fan of crowds because living with CRPS, if somebody bumps into me, even accidentally, it's going to trigger a flare-up. And that flare-up is going to cost me something else in the day. Maybe it means I can't do errands for as long. Maybe it means I can't use that arm. Whatever happens, they could also cause a fall. I don't like crowds. They make me on edge. So we just didn't train Robbie in a lot of crowds because it wasn't good for me to be in a crowd. But the problem was that while we were mostly able to avoid crowds, there were times where we were not able to avoid crowds. And because we never taught Robbie how to be confident in a crowd, we never taught him how to be focused on me in a crowd, we never taught him how to continue doing his tasks in a crowd, he didn't have very much confidence in crowds. He had enough to get by, but he didn't have enough to be the rock and the level of support that I needed from him when we were in crowds. And that was something that we changed with Austin. We've made a point to, at my expense of being uncomfortable, at my expense of risking getting a flare, we've made a point with Austin to take him to as many crowded places as we possibly can so that we're sure that he can heal. He can focus on me. He can do task work. He's confident. He's not going to be shaken by crowds. And he's not. He's way more confident in crowds than Robbie ever was. So that's one thing that I wish people would ask themselves, or that trainers would ask people before they say, yeah, let's train a service dog. And it is one thing that I make sure to ask people is, are you going to be willing to do things that potentially hurt you, cause flares, or that are extremely uncomfortable to the point of barely tolerable for you for the sake of training your dog around them? And if the answer is no, you shouldn't be training your own service dog. You need to have somebody train the dog completely for you. Somebody who is not susceptible to those things, somebody who's healthy probably, or has a different disability. And then the dog comes to you already knowing how to handle those situations so that you don't have to force yourself into those situations just to train your dog. But so that if you happen into those situations, the dog has it covered. Okay? So exceptions to this are places that you definitely are never going to go. I never trained Robbie to movie theaters, and I never trained Austin to movie theaters because I cannot go to movies. The pain is too severe. There's no chance I'm going to accidentally walk into a movie theater and sit down to see a movie. There is a very good chance I could walk into a grocery store and it's incredibly crowded. So that's where the difference is. If you know you're never going to go to a fireworks display because it's bad for your disability or it's bad for your condition or you just hate loud noises, then you may not need to train your dog around fireworks. You might want to train them to loud noises in case they hear fireworks in the distance. And because you might go someplace where you accidentally encounter fireworks, like if you go to a rodeo or a fair, they usually do blow off fireworks. And they don't necessarily say, hey, everybody, we're about to blow off fireworks. If you don't like fireworks, go over there. You know, they're usually a surprise. So it may still be worth your while to train your dog to be okay with like low-level fireworks if you're in an area that allows it. Do not blow off fireworks in wildfire areas. Please check to make sure that it's okay to train your dog with fireworks. But things like that are gonna come up in training. So you need to decide, okay, I don't really like crowds. They make my pain worse, they make my condition worse, they're overwhelming. But do I have it within myself to push that aside and compartmentalize it for enough short bursts of time being 30 minutes or less, to train my dog to be okay and to work in that type of environment in case we encounter it. If you have severe social anxiety, that's going to be a lot harder for you. But I don't want to blanket say people with anxiety can't train their service dogs, because that's not true. People with anxiety absolutely can train their own service dogs. But depending on your grade of anxiety, you need to be willing to have an honest conversation with yourself or an outside person. Have this conversation with a friend, somebody who's going to ask you hard questions and make you think about the answers and who's not going to let you lie to them. Can I do this? How would I go about doing this? Is there a way I can go about doing this in a way that works with my limitations, but still accomplishes what we're trying to accomplish with the dog? That is a benefit when you get a dog that's pre-trained, is a healthy person who is unaffected by your triggers is able to train the dog to work around those triggers. And the dog then can take the wheel when you're put in those situations. But when you're owner training, you have to put yourself in the fire sometimes, metaphorically, in order to train your dog how to help you later. And that's really difficult. And it's not talked about enough, but it is something that owner trained teams need to be more aware of. The fourth thing is you really need to have the same rules at home and at public. I've spoken to a lot of teams who have weird behavioral problems, and they're not quite sure why. And weird things like, oh, my dog is perfect in public, but when he's at home, he counter surfs, or when he's at home, he pulls on the leash, or as soon as I take his vest off, he pulls on the leash and jumps on people and is just kind of a wild child. And they asked me what they should do. And same rules. It's so simple. With a few exceptions here and there. our dogs have the exact same level of behavior that we expect from them, whether they're at our house off duty, at a friend's house, at a family's house, or working in public. They're not allowed to jump on people. They're not allowed to steal stuff. They're not allowed to bark at people unless it's playtime. They're outside, that's fine. But if they're in a house, there's not to be any barking. They can't, go potty in the house. They can't just destroy furniture. They have to ask permission to get on the bed. They're only allowed on 1 or 2 pieces of furniture, and only on permission, and only with a special blanket put down first. And these are rules that are consistent across the board. So it's very clear for our dogs what the rules are. We're extremely consistent with them. And people might argue, well, when I come home, my service dog is off duty. They should get to be a dog. And I understand that logic, but unless your definition of dog is be a jerk, it shouldn't be that hard to employ some house rules where your dog is under control and they're calm and they're responsive to you and they're not like living with the Tasmanian devil. It's confusing to your dog when you have different rules for different places. Going to work, going to public access is kind of like they have to go into work mode. They have to go into a certain higher standard of etiquette. But when they come home, they absolutely should be allowed to have some silly time. The dogs can bark outside. They can run around the house a little bit. They can run around the house with some control. But they're still not allowed to pull on the leash. They're still not allowed to chase squirrels. They're still not allowed to chase or harass my rabbits. These rules are all still enforced, whether they're on duty, whether they're off duty, whether they're wearing gear or not. If they're at my house, they're at a friend's house, these rules are consistent. And the consistency that we have at home flows over into public access. My dogs don't chase squirrels in public when they're working. They don't get distracted and zeroed in on squirrels when they're working because they're not allowed to do that behavior when they're at home. It's just off the table completely. We don't behave around squirrels that way. And so it's not confusing for them. And it's not like, well, it's allowed sometimes, not allowed sometimes. It's allowed by one person of the family, but it's not allowed by another person of the family. No, same rules everywhere from everyone. Now, where it starts to get different at home versus in public is at home, if my dog wants to sprawl across the floor, fine. But if we're doing a structured training exercise on leash, it's not allowed. Not allowed in public. At home, if my dog wants to get goofy with the laundry where they're tossing their head, or Robbie used to low crawl across all of my clothes before he'd put them in the basket, just crazy stuff. And he'd make Chewbacca noises if I wasn't giving him a treat fast enough and he was frustrated. That totally fine with at home. But if he tried to do that in public or act that way while he did tasks in public, he would get corrected. And so there are going to be some differences between home and public. It's not going to look like a perfect picture, but the base layer stuff, the fundamental behavioral things like walking on a leash, respecting doorways, respecting your personal space, jumping on people, stealing things, counter surfing, surfing the floor especially, all of those need to be consistent across the board, no matter where you are, to ensure that your service dog stays as stable as possible and to ensure that you're preventing any behavioral problems from developing. And this is a really big one. I know people who treat, if their dog gets startled or stressed out in public, they handle it the right way. They, work the dog through it, or they just ignore it and let the dog process it, whatever. But then when they're at home, they snuggle their dog and they cuddle them and they, oh, it's okay, baby, you're going to be fine, kind of nonsense. And that's confusing for the dog too. And that can cause so many more problems. Like developing a fear of loud noises in your dog. So there will be some differences between public and home. But when it comes to those foundational manners, etiquette, behavior, rules of how we act in the home, how we act in friends' homes, how we act in public, those need to be as consistent as possible so that you don't have a confused dog and so that you don't have a dog who starts to unravel in public. Because here's the thing, no matter how awesome your working dog is, if they start to unravel at home, eventually that will start to crack their service dog mode. It will start to bleed over into working in public. You'll start to see weird things happen in public. And by weird, I mean things that are out of character. Peeing on a houseplant in Lowe's. Things that seem really small, but aren't for a service dog. And this ties into that as well. Service dogs don't become pets when they're naked. Okay, they're still service dogs. You still need to try and hold them to a higher standard than you would a pet dog because, one, they need that level of consistency to do their job well. And two, even if your dog is naked, if you call them to come help you, they better come help you. Doing their job doesn't have to do with gear. Now, yes, there are some tasks that are very gear-based, but your dog should still be capable and still be responsive enough to you to come help you when they don't have their fancy service dog gear on. And so if you've implanted this idea into their brain that as soon as they come home, as soon as they're not wearing any gear, they can do whatever the hell they want, and they don't have to listen to you, and they don't have to come help you, they won't. And that's a problem. Because while we do want to teach work brain and off brain, realistically, there are going to be times where your dog's naked and you need help. That's just hard to escape. And especially true if you have an unpredictable disability like POTS or CRPS. And if you create this idea for your dog that not wearing any gear means they can be crazy, then it's going to be much harder for them to keep their marbles when crazy stuff happens. Like your house burned down with all your service dog gear and now your dog has to work naked, but they don't know how to because they've never been asked to. Or your house got flooded, lost all your service dog gear. Service dog has to work naked, but they don't know how to because you've never asked them to. Or very common thing when you go through TSA at the airport is they ask you to take all of your dog's gear off and have them walk through the machine completely naked in a very crowded, busy airport. Your dog has to maintain their work mode while completely naked to do the thing right. And if they lose their marbles because you took their clothes off and that's the kind of mentality you've trained them to, you're going to have very big problems on your hands. People think the little things don't matter, and it's one of the more frustrating things to deal with and to have conversations about because all of the little things do matter with your dog. And they especially matter with your service dog. So yes, having consistent rules for public and home behavior is incredibly important for your service dog. It's important for your pet dog if you want to take them on pet-friendly adventures too, but it's especially important for your service dog because your service dog can get you kicked out of places if they misbehave, and you rely on them for your quality of life and your functionality. And so it's a different relationship than what you have with a pet dog. The next thing that I wish more teams were training were heel patterns. And this is something that arguably is going to be harder for teams who also use another type of mobility device, such as a wheelchair or walker, or crutches or cane. But if you can find a way to do them, I do think they will benefit you and your team. And here's why. I teach heel patterns in my foundation obedience, and I teach it in my advanced obedience. In foundation obedience, you learn how to do different patterns like circles, big circles, small circles, figure eights with a sit or a down somewhere in the pattern, squares, serpentines, so like loops like a snake, square serpentines where you make a serpentine loop but you have hard edges like a square, a checkout line pattern where you have the dog sit and then heel for a few steps and then lay down and then heel for a few steps and then sit and so on. And then I repeat these patterns. And also pace matching. So walking slow and then fast and then normal and then slow and then fast and then normal, and changing up what pace you're going and making sure the dog can maintain heel no matter what pace you're going. And then I do those again in advanced obedience off leash, and include other things like being in heel and being sent to place and then called off place into a moving heel, where you're actively walking and the dog has to run and catch up to you and find the right spot to be in heel beside you, or heel to over where they jump over a hurdle and then return to heel, or heel to up and then they jump off of a surface and come back to heel, and things like that. I also teach a dropped leash stop, where if you're walking along and you drop your leash, the dog just instantly stops moving. That's an emergency thing. But these are all types of patterns and maneuvers that I teach with heel, and it goes way more in depth than what most trainers are doing. But the reason I teach it is that it's the best way to make sure that your dog is actively paying attention to your movements and what's going on around you guys. And it prepares them surprisingly well for heeling in a store and dealing with all the crazy layouts of random shelves in the middle of aisles and having to weave around other people while still maintaining that heel position and staying close to you. And I teach heel patterns because the first trainer I worked with liked them. And so he taught them to me. But the more I did them, the more I started to come up with my own patterns based off of patterns that I used to do when I rode horses. Because when I rode horses, patterns were integral for getting the rider and the horse to sync up together and to be on the same page. They were perfect for problem horses who got bored and would do bad habits if they got bored of just going around in a circle. Patterns forced the horse to stay on their toes and be more actively thinking and actively engaging with the rider than just going into autopilot. And it's really, really easy for your service dog to go into autopilot, especially if you follow the same routines every day. But the bad thing about autopilot is that if something changes, your dog isn't ready for it and they don't adapt to the change fast enough. And sometimes it's okay. And other times that's when you fall down. And if your dog had been beside you and had been aware of what's going on, you might not have fallen down. So heel patterns are something that they're not very common to teach. And when I teach them, I don't teach that obsessive, I'm going to stare at you heel. I teach I want your eyes forward, but you're going to keep an eye on my legs, kind of out of the corner of your eye by slightly turning your head. And that's it. And the reason I teach it that way is because that I'm going to look up at you heel, personally, I find it obnoxious. But second, for mobility and bracing dogs, when a dog looks up at you like that while they're moving, the dog is off balance. And so when you go to brace on them, you're more likely to tip them or yourself or everybody over, or put weird stresses on their back, even if nobody falls over. So it's not safe for mobility dogs to be doing that type of heel. And I personally find it incredibly grating. I've also had a dog try to do that before, and they pushed themselves up against me, which knocked me off balance and made it harder for me to walk, which was unpleasant. But heel patterns are something that once you teach it to your dog, first on leash and then off leash, it's something you can always go back to. And I love them. They're hard at first, but I love them. You can get creative with them. You can make different combinations. And especially if you have a yard or you're able to walk to a park close to your house, if you're not feeling up for a long walk with your dog, or you're not feeling like your balance is perfect enough to walk beside traffic, heel patterns are the next best way to walk your dog at home. You can do them in your yard. You can do them in your driveway. You can do them while you're playing really loud music or sound bites. You can do them while your friend throws toys past your dog as a distraction. You can do them while your friend plays with their dog a few feet away as a distraction. And you can get incredibly creative with what you do and what distractions are at play, but stay at home. And this is why I love them, because not only do they help you and your dog get in sync and help you and your dog get on the same page, they also reveal problems to you, areas that your dog is a little bit weaker in and needs more work on. And they're a safe way to exercise and train and engage with your dog if you're having a bad day. Maybe you're not having a curl up in bed kind of day, but you're having a day where, I just don't trust my legs today, but I know I got to give my dog some kind of exercise. Maybe they aren't ready for a treadmill yet. Maybe you've been doing a lot of treadmill work. Maybe you are going to do the treadmill later, but right now you're going to do heel patterns for 20 to 30 minutes. And that 30 minutes is not solid 30 minutes of heel work. You're mixing playtime and patterns and other training exercises all together for 30 minutes. So it gives your dog mental stimulation and physical stimulation, and they get on the same page with you, and they get playtime and that level of release as well. And so they're such a powerful way to work with your dog, and they're largely not done by a lot of people. And this ties me into the final thing, the sixth thing I think more teams should be doing, is training outside of stores. And heel patterns are easy enough to size down to be able to do them outside of storefronts. Here's the thing. Why would you be outside of a store? Well, people don't realize how your dog sees the world. And it can be extremely powerful when you're training a service dog to introduce them to various aspects of their future working environment gradually. Training outside the store can be just as rich and informative for your dog as being inside the store, without being as overwhelming as being inside the store. Outside the store has smells, foot traffic, sights and sounds. They can hear the inside of the store every time the door is open, but they're not being overwhelmed and bombarded by whatever is actually in that store. Stores for dogs are people moving quickly, slippery floors, bright lights. If it's a pet store, dogs, tight aisles, dogs coming at your face in a tight aisle. Weird smells, things they're not used to, chemical smells, aisles that are really tight together, small doorways, cramped spaces, all sorts of things that if your dog isn't properly acclimated to those types of stimuli and your dog isn't ready for it, can be immensely overwhelming. Most of the time when you see pets dragged to pet-friendly places, they don't look chill. They look stressed out. But the owner doesn't know that they're stressed out because most people don't know what stressed out looks like. Most people don't realize you need to actually train your dog how to be okay with being in stores, because stores are so wildly different from what home feels like to your dog. And when you are training a dog, one of the best things you can do is take a complex thing and break it into small pieces for your dog. And so training your dog public access skills and socialization for public access, one of the ways you can make it into, you can take that really complex thing of being in a store and break it down into smaller pieces, is you can work outside the store first. And depending on the store, depending on the layout, parking lot, whatever, you can actually break that into multiple stages. So when we first started taking Robbie to Walmart, we actually started working with Robbie in the green space across the parking lot, across from the storefront. And then we worked in the parking lot, and then we worked outside the storefront, and then we took him inside the store. And this progression, we got him closer and closer to the thing. We worked the distance. He got used to traffic. He got used to foot traffic. He got used to shopping carts, noises, parking lots, all sorts of things. And then we introduced him to the store. And by that point, also, in his training at home, he got to the point of commands and tasks, and we were able to use those and incorporate them into his training and give him something to focus on. And this does tie back into the simple existence exercise as well. But I'm not just talking about simple existence. I'm talking about practicing recalls outside of stores, practicing sit and down and place outside of stores, practicing ignoring people outside of stores, practicing walking with a shopping cart outside of the store. You know, things that, any way that you can take some piece of the environment and let your dog get used to it in a less stressful and a less pressure-filled way is going to help your dog succeed and be ready for the harder stuff. Being in a place like Walmart or another type of grocery store is really hard for a dog. There's a ton of spatial pressure happening all around them at any given time. And working outside the store lets your dog start to get used to some of that spatial pressure of people passing close by, shopping carts passing close by, doors opening and closing, having to be in certain commands and things like that, but without all of it happening all at once, nonstop. You know, working outside of a store, it also gives you a chance to sync up with your dog before you go in the store. I've talked to people before who the dog is so excited to go in the store that they're pulling on the leash or they're barking or they're spinning in circles and they're just absolutely bonkers. And I say, okay, well, at what point do you go in the store? And usually their answer is, well, we just go inside and then they settle down. And I say, that's not what you should do. What you should do is you should spend 15 or 20 minutes doing patterns, doing commands, doing exercises outside of the store. Get your dog focused on you, get them working with you, get them paying attention to what's going on with you and responsive to you, and then you go in the store. Because if you just go in the store while your dog's still being excited and bonkers about going into the store, you're not actually ever going to stop that behavior. You're just encouraging it and you're rewarding it. So there's two parts to that. First, if your dog is acting bonkers, even if it's because they love their job and they're really excited, they still need a correction for that kind of behavior because they're a service dog. They could seriously hurt you doing that stuff. Second, You need to take the time to get your dog to calm down and focus and get rid of some of that anticipation and excitability before you go in the store. This is work time. It is work time as soon as you unload from the vehicle, not as soon as you go into the store. And so working outside of stores, working on college campuses, working outside of restaurants before you ever go inside a restaurant, things like that seem boring. But things that are boring for you are still chocked full of learning opportunities for your dog. And it's going to help you learn more about what your dog needs and what your dog needs. If your dog is struggling hard to be outside a store, your dog's not ready to be inside the store. And that's important information to have as well. So in conclusion, 6 things that I think more teams need to be including in their training program are chair and table etiquette. So how to position your dog into or beside a chair or a table, and then also positioning them getting them out of that position in a close way and in a way ready to perform tasks. Simple Exist in the early days to help with socialization and the ability to learn to be bored and the ability to nap in public areas. Training around situations that you, the owner and handler, don't particularly like, so that we can be sure the dog knows how to handle that situation. Having the same rules at home and in public to maintain consistent behavior no matter where your dog is or what gear they're wearing. Heel patterns to help teach your dog to engage with you and get out of autopilot mode, and also to give you a safe way to exercise your dog if the safest place for you to be is in your yard or your driveway and not out on the road just yet. And training outside of stores to make sure that your dog is fully engaged with you before you go inside a public space. Thank you for listening to this topic on 6 things owner training teams should be including but aren't or may not be. If you have any questions about any of these skills or topics, please leave a comment or send me a message. If you'd like to include any of these to your own current existing training program, send me a message so we can get you set up with a short skill course to help you teach these. Thank you for listening.